Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar on post-Brexit trade, the story so far. This afternoon, you have myself, Christine O'Neill, the Chairman of Brody's with Charles Livingston, one of my partners in our government regulation and competition team. You've heard from us before on a number of occasions about Brexit. We are delighted to be joined by people who are far more interesting than us this afternoon. So we are joined by James Withers, who's the Chief Executive of Scotland Food and Drink. He's been with Scotland Food and Drink since 2011. He is a regular contributor to Brody's events. We're very grateful that he has given up his time to contribute to this webinar this afternoon. And similarly, Liam Smyth, who's the Director for Trade Facilitation with the British Chambers of Commerce, and formerly the Deputy CEO of the Aberdeen Grampian Chamber of Commerce. He is particularly interested at the moment on rules of origin issues, and that's one of the things he's going to be speaking to us about on this webinar this afternoon. So in terms of format, what we're going to do is we're going to hand over shortly to James and to Liam for each of them to give us a short introduction to their views on the state of the nation and where we are in terms of post-Brexit trade so far. I'll then hand over to Charles, who's going to lead the conversation between James and Liam by reference to the questions that you kindly submitted in advance of this session. We'll get through those in probably about half an hour to 40 minutes, and we will then, nearer the end of the seminar, come back to me, and as I say, I will take up any questions that have come in the course of the presentation, and please do add those to the list. So I'm going to start by handing over to James. James, you have, in a kind of quiz show style, you've got 5 minutes to tell us about how things look from Scotland Food and Drink's perspective. I should say, James, that you are followed on Twitter by a close family member of mine who spotted your tweets at the turn of the year about problems at the border and immediately went out to do a panic shop at the supermarket. So if we can avoid that this afternoon, I'll start by handing over to you.
Thanks very much, Christine. If it was a panic buy of Scottish products, I think we've stumbled upon a brilliant campaign. I'll be sure to send out some more alarmist social media stuff. I have to say, amidst lockdown, of all the terrible TV I've watched, a quiz on Brexit definitely wouldn't even make the cut of an already dreadful number of programmes I've been watching to keep myself entertained. Look, thank you very much. Delighted to join Brody's team again. And to be able to double act with Liam today, who will, for sure bring a lot of insight into the issues. I will not talk for too long, mostly because I've been told not to, and also because I have a habit of talking for too long when we get into Brexit. And I won't go through all the various individual problems that we have been facing, because I imagine they will come out in the discussion. And frankly, if we just started going through all the individual problems, we would run out of time very, very quickly. So I suppose a quick summary of where are we now, and maybe more importantly, where do we go next? Clearly it's been a very, very rough first few weeks of the year. So I'm going to look at this from a food and drink lens, obviously being our core membership, and Liam has a much broader perspective from the wide number of sectors that work with the chambers. From a food and drink perspective, a really rough first few weeks that we have faced actually started pre the 1st of January with the French deciding to test how ready we were for border disruption by shutting down the French border on the 20th of December, I think it was. But it's been tough since then. At best, really, even if all the various hurdles are navigated in trying to get product from Scotland into the continent, if they are all navigated well, we are left with a system that is now costly, slow, unreliable, complex, and prone to breakdown. And it is a natural consequence of doing what we are doing, which is live testing a multi-billion-pound trading system in real time. And all the pleas that industry made about we're not going to be ready, all the pleas that our counterparts across the UK made about not being ready, all the pleas that the government's own watchdog, the National Audit Office, made about not being ready, were dismissed with a kind of, it'll be all right on the night. Well, it ain't all right on the night, and it's not been all right on the night now for 6 weeks. Seafood challenges have been, high in the headlines. They've been hit hardest and hit first. And that's just the nature of trying to get perishable products from the north of Scotland or the west coast of Scotland into markets in France and Spain within 12 to 24 hours, and an EU third country import system that was never built for that. It's fair to say that this is not a busy exporting time of the year generally, and yet we have faced massive challenges at the moment. Red meat exports are running at about 25 to 30% of what they would normally be. And if you are in the business of trying to shift craft beer, craft spirits, if you can find a logistics provider that will even give groupage a go, you are doing well, because it is a massive, massive problem. There are questions about whether we are seeing the start of a fundamental restructuring of EU supply chains, I think. And even for our big multinational businesses like our salmon exporters, salmon is the UK's #1 food export. These businesses do international in their sleep. They do export paperwork in their DNA, and they have found massive challenges in dealing with things, and a real problem that you cannot guarantee your customer that they're going to get the product when they need to get it. And that becomes a real issue for customers who might think, maybe I should just buy from Norway rather than coming to Scotland. Red meat buyers thinking, maybe I should just buy from Spain or Ireland rather than coming to Scotland. Fishing boats thinking, maybe I should just burn 2 days worth of fuel and head over to Denmark to land my fish rather than land them in Peterhead, because at least then the product can get trucked from Denmark to Spain within the single market. So it's been a light export start to the year, thin volume, some improvements, but there is real challenges to come. I'm frightened about Easter, if I'm honest. The controls on imports coming into the country will really pick up. We will see COVID restrictions hopefully unwind on the continent, so the food service market, all those restaurants and hotels that we sell to, will start to open up again. Freight volumes will increase, and there's a risk we could have more products caught with some of the export health certificate requirements. So it ain't good, was my summary of where we are just now. And even if it gets better operationally, we have just a much more difficult way of trading with our biggest market that certainly buys 2/3 of all our Scottish food. So what needs done? Very quickly, in 1 minute, it has become clear, as I said, that the EU's third country import system for food and drink was never built for the likes of the UK. It was never built for a country highly integrated into its supply chain. It was never built for a country moving lots of perishable products within 12 to 24 hours. It was never built to deal with consolidated loads of different products from different companies. It was built for sending a single container of frozen lamb halfway around the world, but frankly, if it got delayed a few days, it doesn't really matter. So we have a real problem with the fundamental system. There is political will to fix GBNI issues, and I haven't touched on them and I won't at the moment. There's political will to fix GBNI for all the sensitivities there. That same political will needs to go into fixing stuff across the short straits and the North Sea into the continent. In other words, can we use the auspices of an EU-UK trade deal, the TCA, to think about some kind of agreement around veterinary issues, around these SPS, sanitary and phytosanitary checks, to try and smooth some of the trading? And as all these structures get built in the EU to manage this deal, that is going to be crucial to do that, or else what we have seen at the moment in terms of short-term disruption will become the new normal, and it ain't acceptable. So I'll stop there, Christine.
James, thank you. You won't be able to avoid the GBNI issue for the whole hour, so we will come back to that. Not a very positive or optimistic opening, I must say, but I'm not surprised about that. Liam, do you have any better news for us?
Well, I wish, Christine, that I could give you better news, but can I start by saying that as a network, the Chamber network were very clear throughout that a deal was absolutely required and was much better starting point than ending up with no deal. So as a starting point, the TCA is just that. We should remember that it's an association agreement. It's got the opportunity for amendment. So some of those points that James makes about perhaps finding a better deal than the one we have at the moment, the opportunity could be there to negotiate that through the Partnership Council, now co-chaired by Lord Frost as of yesterday, and as he comes onto the Cabinet table. There's also within that agreement, there are 20 partnership councils, so there's structure within it to engage with specialist groups such as the food and drink sector and others, and also 4 working groups within that. So we want to engage with those structures and that governance model to try and improve the deal for UK businesses. But whilst we have a deal, there remains considerable problems with how the new arrangements are operating across a range of sectors. We hear about food and drink right now because, of course, those are the perishable goods that couldn't be stockpiled in December, as many other sectors did, that couldn't be moved in the supply chain, as many sectors did. And the consequence of that is that we've seen much lower volumes of trade in January and into February than we would otherwise have expected to see. So that also means that many businesses haven't experienced the problems yet, or experienced the challenges, or been able to iron out the wrinkles so far. We think in terms of three broad types of problem. The first type are areas where there's an issue around how businesses are adjusting, such as through maybe the lack of guidance or access to reliable advice. So businesses are adjusting to the new rules but don't quite know how to do that. The second area are where there's something about how the deal is implemented. And this can be as simple as a customs or a border agent in the Netherlands interpreting slightly differently to a border agent in Norway. And so, we've got real people at the heart of this who, sometimes just don't understand the rules or how to apply them, or frankly, just get out the wrong side of bed in the morning. And so one day they would approve something, the next day that they don't. And then the third area is where there's something that's fundamentally baked into the nature of the deal. And those things that are, and James has talked to some of those in terms of, fish and shellfish, which are just very difficult to move in markets. And the effect of all that in traders so far is, for some, there's additional cost. And these costs are way more significant than they maybe were able to anticipate. Some of it is about additional time that they're having to spend in doing this work that require more resources. And some of it, and some of those effects make certain types of business activity just uneconomic. And so there's an existential issue for some traders. And we heard from Samantha Cameron, for example, talking about her fashion business and how things had changed. And you think, the former partner of our recent Prime Minister, even she hadn't anticipated what would change in this deal. And actually, one can be sympathetic because we didn't have an 11-month transition period. We had a 2-day transition period. The nature of this deal was communicated in guidance from government on the 29th of December. Before that point, businesses couldn't actually interpret or be able to have guidance on what this deal meant for them. And remember, it's Christmas Eve when the agreement is reached. So it's all done very last minute and in a way that makes it impossible for traders to have anticipated. So actually, we are now in the period of transition where businesses are ironing out and getting to grips with what has changed. And one of the main problems that I will talk about today is rules of origin, because the headline when the deal is announced on 24th of December is that the Prime Minister says this will bring tariff-free trade to UK businesses. Well, it will if you're trading goods that originate wholly in the UK. Well, not wholly, but actually are able to be conferred as with UK origin. And as a trading nation that buys and sells goods and has done since God was a boy, we are well used to buying goods from other markets, repurposing, repackaging, or simply marketing them and making a margin in those goods. And for lots of trade that we do, actually you cannot confer UK rules of origin. Therefore, the trade with the EU will not come tariff-free. Can I turn just briefly to our recent Brexit survey that we did, carried out between 18th and 31st of January. It showed some stark reality for businesses. And this had a response level of over 7,000 businesses in the UK. Proportionately, more firms reported decreased sales than in our quarter 4 2020 results. So 61% of firms said that they had seen a decrease in revenue from UK customers compared to October 2020, and only 19% saw an increase. So the backdrop to this current circumstance is that actually our economy was tanking. For traders, sales were reducing. And actually COVID was a factor, and we've got a factor that James talked about, in terms of getting goods to market, affected by the need for COVID tests on drivers entering and leaving the UK. And there's also, sectoral divides continue to grow. So B2C firms and also those in hospitality, catering, retail, consumer services, far more likely to report higher distress levels. And they're much more reliant on government funding right now, government support and issues with cash flow. But here's the thing on exporters. the percentage facing difficulties in adapting to changes in trading goods rose for exporters, where half reported issues. And then in manufacturing, so it's 49% in all exporters and 51% for those in manufacturing sector. So people are reporting significant experiential change in the way that they move goods. And this isn't just about, frankly, whether you already traded goods to the rest of the world and knew what to do. Even if you did trade to the rest of the world and knew what to do, you've actually got to know what to do in the context of the EU, which is different. It's a different trade agreement. There are differences in rules of origin. We don't have accumulation, for example. And so businesses are going through a significant period of adaptation that is costing our economy.
Leo, thank you very much. That's very helpful, and I know we will come back to rules of origin. Charles, I'm going to hand over to you to start the discussion. I know I have at least one question that's been asked in the course of those presentations, and I would encourage our participants to add to that list, and I will come back in a bit to take those up with you. But Charles, over to you, and I'll disappear.
Okay, thanks, Christine. So James, Liam, thanks very much for that. One of the things that we encountered in the lead up to the end of transition was, I think it was a challenge to distinguish for our clients and our contacts, distinguish between those things where a deal might make a difference to what they were going to have to do, and those things that were going to come in anyway. I think a lot of what you've both spoken about in terms of the challenges are probably in the latter category. They're things that the deal was never necessarily going to resolve. See, Liam's already questioning that premise. So my opening question is, to what extent has the deal actually made a difference? What positives has it produced? And to what extent are the problems that are being encountered things that a deal was never really going to cover? Liam, do you want to go first?
Well, I slightly grimaced there because, you know, in any negotiation, when a deal such as this is being negotiated, in retrospect, we can look back and say, for example, the EU always said that diagonal accumulation wasn't on the table. But the EU also said lots of other things weren't on the table, which have appeared on the table. So the nature of a negotiation is that one can anticipate and try and anticipate what might happen, and different sides will express views. But actually, I, for one, you know, I understand the motivation of the EU in not including diagonal accumulation, because they're concerned that the UK becomes a service centre and a distribution centre for the rest of the EU, something that already exists actually in our industry. We have, you know, EU centres of distribution and warehousing here right now, and the EU didn't want to give us any more advantage in that. But actually, diagonal accumulation has benefits for traders in the EU as well, in serving other markets in which there are trade deals. So I thought that, you know, eventually the common sense would prevail, as one says, and there would be a degree of diagonal accumulation, even if it was between UK and EU. And that's not come to pass. I still remain hopeful that maybe there may be something that can be done there. So yeah, lots of things are baked into the deal that are unhelpful. I think, you know, in terms of some of the positives, I would say that we've got a deal as a positive. That there are, you know, UK manufacturers that can confer UK origin on their goods, have still got the EU as a marketplace that they can sell to. But what still remains for them is the challenge of dealing with VAT when the goods arrive on the other side, and the customs formalities that are involved there. So, you know, there are positives in that we've got a deal. Beyond that, I think there's, between now and the 5-yearly review that will happen down the line, I would certainly be hopeful that the negotiations that take place will bring some changes or review that will have reciprocity in there, as both sides understand what their economies are dealing with and the difficulties that can be maybe ironed out.
Thanks, Liam. I might come back to you about rules of origin and accumulation. I attempted to cover those in our last webinar, but our audiences are not totally overlapping. So even those who did even if people did follow me last time, not everybody heard me last time. So I might come back to you just to unpack those concepts a little bit. But first, James, in terms of the deal, obviously food and drink sector, agricultural products in particular, was where some of the most significant tariffs would have come in the absence of a deal. So you obviously didn't get what you want. Are there positives that you take from it though?
So the big win is not having tariffs. So that is the main win within the piece, because if you look at WTO tariffs, the worst tariffs sit on agri-food products. Now, it would have solved the export problems, for example, our red meat sector is currently facing, because they wouldn't have been exporting at all, because there would have been, between a 48 to 83% tariff on various different products. So that would have killed the trade altogether. So the deal has the plus side of avoiding tariffs. After that, I'm struggling to find the positives. And the reason I'm struggling to find the positives is because we've adopted really the hardest form of trading. And we are finding we have erected the most remarkably high level of non-tariff barriers than almost any other country in the world has dealing with the EU. And actually, it's easier for us at the moment, cheaper and less complex to sell to China than it is to send something 30 miles over the English Channel just now. And I think part of the problem is, you asked the question, did we know things are always coming along the line? Well, yes, we did. We knew export health certificates were going to be part of it. We didn't know up until the deal was done that seed potato exports were going to be banned. We didn't know that live sheep sales to Northern Ireland were going to be banned. We didn't know that fresh mint sales to the European Union were going to be banned. So there's a whole heap of things that are coming that we just didn't know about. And I think part of the problem around business readiness, aside from Liam's really critical point that, this was a deal done on Christmas Eve, some systems went live on the 29th. The border operating model was published at 5 p.m. on Hogmanay. Now, I was at least two drinks into my Hogmanay, even though I was at home. So the idea we were all going to study 164 pages to get ready for what was going to happen in 6 hours' time is ludicrous. And by the way, that document keeps still getting updated. So, we're still writing the instruction manual for this, and it's still breaking down. So the challenge is we got things late. We were in the middle of, and still are in the middle of, a global pandemic. Most food and drink businesses we work with just trying to get through the week, just trying to survive, look after their workforce, let alone deal with the biggest trading change of a lifetime with our biggest trading partner. So that has been a huge challenge, aside from the fact we were told of sunlit uplands as a sea of opportunity, and there was a bankruptcy of honesty in the whole debate that this was always going to be about trade-offs. There's going to be some pain. And I have to say, for any of you that are sad enough, like me, to watch the PM's statement on Christmas Eve and not be tucking into the mulled wine, he said there are no non-tariff barriers. I mean, just beyond belief, and the very opposite of where we are just now. So expectations were mismanaged. We were in the middle of a global pandemic and the worst crisis many businesses have faced for a generation. We got a late deal that we weren't ready for, and there's a heap of problems there that we never saw coming in the first place. So the glass half full part of that is, let's take the evidence we now have of 6 weeks of a much more dysfunctional trading environment and think how we can maybe try and drive some change. And my one hope would be that if we can create some clear water between the big deal and all the dogmatic stuff around sovereignty and all of that, and do not align with the EU on anything. Now that that's put to bed, the hard Brexiteers are focused on other things, fighting lockdown and other stuff. We can maybe have a really logical debate on some of the intricate detail to try and get things moving again. But that's a long-winded way of saying we avoided tariffs, but boy, did we get everything else.
Okay, Liam, if I can come back to you just to unpack a little bit, rules of origin, diagonal accumulation, a very brief primer for the audience, also why they matter and what could have been done differently.
Okay, so why they matter? I mean, the nature of the international rules-based system is that when it comes to allowing tariff-free trade, generally speaking, or almost exclusively, there will be a description of what trade can be tariff-free. And typically this will be a threshold of, say, 50% of the content of a good must be originating in the country of export. And so where there's bilateral accumulation, then in the case with the UK and EU, then you have to meet that threshold for your commodity, whatever your product is. So let's take it as being 50%. That would be 50% of the invoice value would be made up of either of all the inputs, including labour. It can be IP. You know, you have to be able to argue in a tax case for the 50% threshold that you reach. So if you simply buy goods, I'll give you an example. So a firm I know, they're a part of a Japanese multinational. They have some shareholding from a Japanese multinational. They buy kit, machinery from that multinational. It comes from Japan. It comes into the UK. Prior to December, that was the UK. The UK was the European hub for reselling those goods. So they arrived in the UK into the single market. They went to the EU without any tariffs and any tariff barriers. Now they come from Japan into the UK under the UK-Japan trade agreement, which does allow for accumulation, a diagonal accumulation. So they come in from Japan, and the moment they go to the EU, they're subject to tariffs because although the EU has an agreement with Japan, the direct import came into the UK. So the origin, the conferring of origin, if you like, and the availability of preference comes in a wrapper that's created by the agreement. Once the wrapper comes off and the goods have arrived at their original destination, you can no longer use rules of origin for preference. So when they arrive in the EU, they're subject to tariffs. I mentioned Samantha Cameron. She buys goods from a variety of markets and resells business to consumer. And of course, anything going to the EU can't be conferred as UK origin because the goods were not manufactured in the UK. We're too expensive a place to manufacture fashion, typically. Not always, but typically. Certainly Samantha Cameron's fashion, I think, was manufactured elsewhere, in Italy and those fashion houses and the like. So they're subject to tariffs and they're subject to VAT being due on those goods. Where diagonal accumulation would have an advantage would be that goods inputs from countries with which the European Union had a trade agreement could be input and counted in that 50% sum in making UK origin for goods being tariff-free into the EU. So if we had that machine from Japan coming into the UK, could have been re-exported to the European Union under diagonal accumulation and have been tariff-free. And so it's where you get multiple parts that come into a finished product. You know, like motor cars is the easy one to think about. You've got component parts, and the motor car industry's got a bit of a buy for a few years, so that they only have to reach a 30% threshold right now, and it increases over, I think, the next 3 years to the 50% threshold to give time to adjust supply chains. That supply chain adjustment's not being applied elsewhere. And so businesses are looking at where they get components from and how they reach that 50% threshold in order that they can have tariff-free trade with the European Union. And that's pretty tough in an economy like ours and with our kind of manufacturing industry. So diagonal accumulation means that you can have many more inputs from many more countries and then confer the origin. In food and drink, typically goods are wholly obtained, like the smoked salmon, for example. So there's less of a problem with origin in food and drink than there are with the manufacturing sector, but there's still an issue. It can still be an issue for the food and drink sector for sure. I hope that's made it clear. It's fairly complex stuff, but and it's this kind of thing where you really need to look at a specific product and its inputs to understand whether you can confer the origin on it and gain the tariff free trade.
And I think just to add to just to close off that clarity, I mean, rules of origin, that is a standard concept in free trade agreements, isn't it? It's really the customs union that meant they were not experienced before.
Yeah, so I mean, rules of origin are set at the World Trade Organization and World Customs Organization, the principles of rules of origin, and they're common internationally. What changes them is the accumulation element. So to what degree will a nation state allow inputs from outside of the trade partner to be included in the accumulation of origin?
Yeah. James, anything on rules of origin, food and drink? As Liam was saying, you know, a steak from a cow that's born and raised in Great Britain is not so challenging, but processed products can have a bit more of an issue. What have you been seeing there?
Yeah, so usually we're more relaxed than the average bear about rules of origin and trade deals because you don't tend to get integrated supply chains split by large geographies where you might have ingredients coming in, getting processed and sent back out. The reason it's become an issue in the EU is because clearly we've been in that EU for 40 years. And so we do have integrated supply chains where you'll have products that will actually move through different member states with some ingredients coming in, then getting reprocessed and the product going out. So suddenly the food and drink industry is having to learn about rules of origin in the way the car industry has been kind of known about it for a while. So it has become, a real issue for some businesses. I would say it probably tends to be businesses south of the border, some of the really big manufacturers in there than less so in Scotland, but it is an issue. And it's a classic one where like our organization, others are having to quickly learn what on earth this all means and how we adapt to it, let alone the businesses on the ground that when I said we've avoided tariffs. Well, actually, it's not that straightforward when you get into the rules of origin, as Liam has very ably explained.
And also the food and drink sector, whilst your rules of origin may be less of an issue, they've got a massive issue with non-tariff barriers, with SPS checks and the like, and we've seen recently the number of items that actually are just banned by the EU that you can no longer sell. So in the food and drink sector, I think James would talk to this, but there's a lot of carcass product from meat production that goes into the pet food sector, where companies in the UK just don't have a market anymore because all of it went in bulk to the EU for pet food production, and so that really affects your business model. If that what is waste to one person is fodder to another, can't be sold and can't have a value anymore.
Charles, you're on mute.
Thanks, James. It was bound to happen to one of us. Let's talk about some of the border logistics issues that you both touched on in your opening statements. What are the sort of key things that you're seeing? James, you mentioned concept of groupage, maybe unpack that a little bit. We've also seen stories of sort of shortages of freight capacity, costs, shipments being turned away because one item within a shipment doesn't have the right paperwork. Liam, wooden pallets was a hot topic in the lead up to transition. That may have turned out to be a bit of a damp squib. And VAT as well, we've seen a fair amount of stories about traders in the EU no longer sending goods to the UK when they're lower value items. James, do you maybe want to start just in terms of the logistics issues that we're seeing at the moment?
Yeah, so I suppose probably the easiest way to explain it is harking back with a smile and a warm fuzzy feeling at how the world used to be before the end of the year. So it was as easy to send something to Madrid as it was sending it to Milgai. A pallet, product went, you had a kind of cover sheet, declaration, boom, boom, and it's off and going. And now you can have lorries with literally hundreds of pages of documents. Groupage is a particular problem. So this is a mechanism used by a lot of smaller businesses, not just smaller businesses. I have to say, even, I've spoken to businesses with 50, 100 million pound turnover that will use groupage, whereby their products will be consolidated with different products from different companies. So therefore, you've got a 40-foot lorry, which has got lots of different export health certificates and declarations. You then add organic into it, and there's a whole heap of other paperwork that goes in there. So what happens when you add lots of paperwork, and when you go from really a simple system that was very easy to sell to now there are 18 steps that an exporter has to navigate, another 8 that an importer has to navigate, and you need to do all that really well within 24 hours, one little thing going wrong can hold the whole thing up. And the things that have been going wrong have been fundamental things. So IT systems crashing, both HMRC ones, IT systems on the French side of the channel. There have been missing commodity codes. So at the start of January, if you're trying to sell monkfish tails, good luck, there wasn't an official code. Then an official code appeared and then it disappeared again the next day. You have physical inspections being done. So sometimes it could be half a kilo out on the physical inspection of what's in a lorry versus what's in the documentation. Then it gets held up. Then you get into the really ludicrous stuff from that kind of, to the ridiculous end of the spectrum where forms have been films have been filled in blue ink rather than red ink in some cases, or red ink and not blue ink. Everything's held up. The official stamp's been in the same color as the letterhead on the covering form, so that gets then turned away. A long debate about whether we were allowed to transport mackerel in water as well as just ice. whether fish species were being translated into Dutch as well, is why things have get held up. So all of these things have come from having no time to test the system. Now, our counterparts in Europe who are selling into the UK have had a grace period. So almost all the checks on food products, except for controlled substances, are waved through and are coming into the UK until April as it stands at the moment, although I sense that might get delayed again. But so they've had a bit of time. We've had no time. Even if we just had 6 weeks to try and get things moving and saying, actually, do you know what, box 51, you got to tick that or else we'll be held up. So all these things we've been learning very, very painfully in real time and trying to fix. But, you know, the point that I think Liam made earlier about, you know, the volatility and the inconsistency of interpretation. You know, there are a lot of young, inexperienced customs agents learning their job on the other side of the channel as well. And you can get one guy in a good mood one day and you're okay, and then that can change the next day and you've got a real problem. And that just means that really exporting to the EU at the moment is a long odds, high risk gamble. And what we're trying to do is get things right in Scotland. So we have distribution, 3 hubs that are working, one out of, well, the kind of mostly in the Larkhall Central Belt area, trying to do all the checks there, because at least if something goes wrong there, you can probably save the product or send it back. If it goes wrong on the other side of the channel, you've got landfill as an option and a few other undesirable options. So there's been a working list that has been as long as your arm of individual issues, but when it comes down to it, even if all goes out smoothly, as I say, and as Liam says, you've got these core requirements and these huge non-tariff barriers, which are horrendous for food, no matter where you're selling them, if you don't have a, you know, a kind of veterinary or SPS agreement, which we now don't have.
Liam?
I think just to add to that, Charles, you know, James makes a very good point that in the process of the last 6-7 weeks, there's things that your crisis would just get through and we quickly forget, if you like, that they happen. But the point he made about the monkfish tails, you know, we've had an iterative approach from HMRC in dealing with these gaps, if you like, both in the guidance and in the tariff, and also in the way that Chief for the customs handling system, the HMRC operate in GB, and CDS that they operate for Northern Ireland, have all been at times inconsistent in the way that they operate, or the guidance describes what's supposed to happen. So I mean, we act as an intermediary as well through Chamber Customs, our brokerage business. And so we've had many examples in the last 6-7 weeks whereby we haven't been doing anything wrong, but we can't get the customs entry to clear through Chief, because Chief is looking for something that the tariff says isn't required. So there are really, these are the, what I think one MP called teething problems. But my goodness, they're very frustrating to deal with, and they go beyond just teething. Some of these issues will continue to be difficult in the weeks and indeed I think the months ahead. And the introduction of SPS checks in April, as you know, James, I think is right that I think we're certainly lobbying for them to be put back, and I know that others are too. That actually it's too soon to introduce those checks in the UK side. And so whilst I think Toby Metcalf asked this question, to what extent are the issues and problems we're experiencing being shared by European operators? Well, they're not in some respects, because our border is pretty much open. Remember that thing about taking back control of our borders? Well, guys, in terms of trade, our borders are pretty open at the moment as we take this staged approach to introducing controls on EU imports. But the fact is that without that staged approach and that open border, our supermarket shelves would be empty. We wouldn't be getting the goods in. We consume way more than we ever, we import way more than we export, and much of that comes through the EU supply chain or in routes by road that come from other countries via the EU. So we needed to have that to be the case. It is fair to say, though, that when goods from the UK land in the EU, that EU traders are coming to terms with the need to fill out paperwork too, for the first time. They're coming to terms with the need to account for VAT for the first time. And what that's meant for some UK traders is that they've got customers or suppliers who say, look, guys, this isn't working for us. This is uneconomic. You either need to go and find a new supplier, or by the way, we're going to look for new places to buy the thing that you sell us from Spain or from Italy or wherever. And so the risk to businesses here is significant, where the importer says, I just don't want to have to deal with this. I've got 26 other countries I can go to in my market to buy from. And so it's just too hard to trade with the UK.
Yeah, and that's starting to happen.
Oh, I didn't mention wooden pallets. I did say we did talk about wooden pallets a lot in the back end of last year. I don't want to say it is this, but I have referred to this as potentially being the millennium bug of the 1st of January 2000, where computers were set not to work. It seems, I've certainly not heard in the last 6 weeks that access to heat-treated pallets has been an issue for goods moving across the border. Now, it's possible that the EU side has decided to not make an issue of it for UK trade, that they've been much more focused on other things. But so far, it has not been an issue that the supply of heat-treated pallets has stopped goods getting through the border, as far as I'm aware.
And that's because products of plant origin are subject to similar requirements, SPS checks, as the products of animal origin. So before we hand back to Christine for questions, we said we would cover Northern Ireland, and this is segueing a little bit from the topic of grace periods there. I think there's an extent to which there is a bit of a transition period in relation to Northern Ireland. Interested in your views on how that is working and whether you think that will lead to things improving or just getting worse when the grace period ends. But before we go on to that, maybe just unpack a little bit what the situation is in terms of trade between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. James, I think, again, food and drink are kind of at the sharp end of a lot of those issues. Could you give us a very brief overview of that?
Yeah, so it's, again, food and drink is where a lot of the grace periods are. So 3 months for some products, 6 months for others, albeit, there's already talk. I mean, Gove has asked Sefcovic, Trade Commission, if they can shove those grace periods out to 2023. And, that at least is alleviating some things. I think what has become clear, in the same way that a lot of businesses just didn't see or weren't warned or just couldn't get prepared for the level of checks there were going to be, and also the issues that we've talked about trade being banned that we never saw coming. For GBNI, a lot of businesses do B2C sales, and have just stopped that. So, there's a red meat business in the Highlands, a dairy down in Dumfries and Galloway, who would sell orders maybe 30 to 40 quid out to Northern Ireland, and the red tape costs are 45 quid per consignment. So that's goose that. Now, the interesting thing is that Liam might have a handle on this because I don't. There is a movement assistance scheme designed to help with the cost of that, which either isn't getting used or is ineffective. But in effect, what's happening at the moment is a lot of businesses doing B2B sales, even food businesses, have said, we can't deliver to NI at the moment. Clearly, there are challenges in some retail supply chains where we've got product that will go to Northern Ireland, get processed and come back. And again, whilst I don't want to rant about, what UK ministers have said, but part of the challenge is denial. So in the same way we've said there are no non-tariff barriers, we heard on Christmas Eve, you've got Brandon Lewis, the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, saying there's no border in the Irish Sea. Well, geez, try selling something that way, and you'll soon find there's a border. It might not be physical, but there is a border that's there. So it's really difficult to fix a problem when you deny it exists to some extent. Now, on the upside, things are moving, and that is good. There's a recognition of where GBNI isn't working. And if you think we've got groupage problems going into the continent, some of the groupage issues trying to get to Northern Ireland are horrific. I mean, they're talking about what would have been day one for day 1.5 being day one for day 5, some of the hauliers there. There is a political will to get it fixed, because we all know how sensitive politically it will be if this goes wrong in Northern Ireland. I mean, the cost of that doesn't bear thinking about. There isn't that same political sensitivity, no history to GB to the continent, but the same principle of an unworkable export system is there. So there is a will to try and address things in GBNI, which will be potentially creating momentum around this idea of a deal, a deal around standards, alignment of standards. All businesses in the UK are aligned to EU standards. Nothing changed on the 1st of January, and yet we're having to jump through bureaucratic hoops as though we were not. So why don't we reflect the reality of being aligned and remove the red tape requirements, or a number of them just now, and we can worry about when we may not become aligned down the line. But GBNI from a B2B point of view has been less sensitive for us, but from a B2C direct consumer sales, it's a real issue.
Yeah, it is, and you know, recognising the Trader Support Service funded by the government for the next 2 years at a cost of up to £50 million, I think I'm right in saying, and operated by in the private sector by Fujitsu principally as the lead bidder on that, is live and is designed to provide customs clearance at no cost to businesses in Northern Ireland. The challenge, of course, is that it's the model is a self-serve model. It's what was known as an Amazon model, I think, by some in some quarters. So the trader has to input the declaration and make the declaration into a system that's provided for them. The gap is that traders don't know what to input. Now, it is backed up by training for traders. So they have to do the training. They can do the training virtually and online and so on. And that's supposedly set out to equip them to be able to make those clearances. But you know, you've got circumstances in Northern Ireland where, and there's one in the question here from Alice Wilkinson, who's an importer of goods into Northern Ireland, who's facing the challenge of getting the Trader Support Service to give her the answer she needs, which is how do I bring those goods into Northern Ireland? And she's faced the consequence of the deal is that some of their suppliers in England have simply closed their accounts and said we don't want to have you as a customer anymore. I mean, these are serious issues for businesses when the suppliers decide that it's just too complicated, that the cost of getting the goods to Alice and her business is greater than any advantage they have. And so we need to find a way of not only ironing out the problems at a political level, but at a practical level, they have to be able to be understood by traders so that they can keep trading. Because Alice's supplier has lost a customer. 3 suppliers have lost a customer, which is not good. And Alice has lost the capacity to stock their product and resell it at, I imagine, a profit. And her question is, who can help us? As a tiny business, we don't have a team who can decode emails like the one she's received, which is to someone that doesn't understand it will appear as gibberish. And help with the supplier issues. And I guess the answer I should mention is the government's 20 million fund that they announced last week that gives £2,000 per trader to help with just exactly that, finding the advisory service that can help you to unpack that problem that Alice has, and so that she can continue to get her supplies into her business and be able to resell them. Now that grant scheme goes live in early March is what the government say. And so there's time to get ready for that. But there's also support, I know, in Northern Ireland through some other government agencies to provide people like Alice with the support they need to iron out those problems. So I'm not speaking for the government and saying that, I'm just highlighting that for the private sector, there is government funding to do certain things. And certainly Chamber Customs, our business, I'm sure could help people like Alice to find the answer they need.
Okay, we've had quite a few questions in, so I'll hand back to Christine.
Thanks, Charles, and thanks, Liam, for picking up a couple of those on the way through. So we'll not repeat those, and we'll not read out the unintelligible email that Alice has had from the Trader Support Scheme, because it's certainly gibberish to me. There are some.
The thing is, we understand it, Christine.
Well done. There are some technical questions, quite specific questions, and some higher level questions. And I want to take the higher level questions together. They include both sides of this divide, if you like. So there are questions about whether the UK government, in your view, is aware of all of these issues and is committed to eliminating them. But the other questions that have been asked at the same kind of high level are on the EU side. And the question, well, one question is the EU experiencing these difficulties? Are EU exporters experiencing similar kinds of difficulties? I know you've touched on that a little bit. And more fundamentally, question from Stephen Swan at Edinburgh Airport, is there an incentive, and what is the incentive for the EU to bring a fix forward for the issues that you've been describing? So can I ask you to answer those high level questions, and then I'll come back with some of the more specific technical points?
Yeah, I'll come to Stephen's point first in terms of the, you know, do we think that these changes will only occur where there's reciprocal benefit? I think the answer is, of course, yes, that the EU will have to see some benefit. The nature of any market, in particular where you have a union like the European Union, is first of all to protect its members, and we're no longer a member. And so, of course, in negotiating this deal, they've sought to negotiate a deal that's good for their members in the first instance. And if that is a benefit to the UK, then of course that's part of it as well. We've sought to negotiate a deal that's good for UK economy and in the first instance, and so compromise has been achieved there. But any changes that come, further changes we achieve, will have to have reciprocity. Otherwise, they just will not fly. Sorry, can you point me to the other questions, the high-level questions? Again, sorry, I've got lost in my thread.
It was essentially, Liam, what is the incentive for the EU to make the changes, but also to what extent are EU exporters experiencing these problems? And on our side, is UK government, I mean, at the highest level, alert and listening?
Yeah, so I'll go to the second one then, Christine. So in terms of, are EU traders experiencing this as well? Yes, they are. Some difficulties, but they have options to go to other markets. Where it's more marked, or most marked, is where you have an integrated supply chain, so a company owning a number of entities across Europe, and where they now have tariffs that they need to account for within transfer pricing and the like, can be quite complex for businesses. So, you know, they produce a component in a factory in Italy, they bring that to the UK under preference. They then, you know, put a handle on it. That's insufficient transformation, so they can't get tariff-free trade. To what degree do they transform that component into a finished product? And where are the elements of VAT calculation and VAT accounting taking place? And so, yeah, some EU traders are experiencing that. In terms of our government, do they know what's happening? Well, they should, because we keep telling them. And we have regular interaction. I know James does as well with Westminster. I have a daily call into the Cabinet Office on issues. They hear them. Sometimes they make adjustments to address them, and other times they're simply acknowledged as being issues and are longer term. So they know about them at a civil service level. They know about them at a ministerial level, but there has to be the political will to make a change within the strict structures that the government has set for itself. You know, we have to have the ability to develop our own standards and regulations. Well, the fact that we haven't diverged from the EU standards at the moment, as James points out, could be an opportunity for us to actually get some simplifications to take or extension of circumstances right now, or for the EU to allow us some easements. But they will want us to commit to their standards for a period of time to do that. And the government may not be prepared to give that up. That independence is the thing that's the barrier.
James, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, so just what's the incentive of EU coming to the table? At the moment, not much, because they're not feeling much of the pain, certainly in our sector. As Liam says, they've had, I liked his term, for, you know, having a buy for a while that the car industry's got rules of origin. Well, EU exporters who sell into the UK have got to buy until 1st of April on some of the first checks, and then July for some of the other checks. The mood music, you know, privately with the UK government is, we'll get the EU to the table when they start feeling some of the pain that we're feeling. Well, that isn't good enough for us, because that's another 6 weeks, at least 8 weeks we've got to last of what's happening just now. And I have to say, it's the same attitude of brinksmanship and last minute stuff that failed us so spectacularly at the back end of last year. So we need those conversations to start now. What do EU have by way of interest? Their exporters, the same as our exporters, smooth trade. Let's just keep smoothing trade as much as we can. Now, we have more to lose. And part of the reason the deal has failed so many sectors is there was a fundamental imbalance of power. We had way more to lose than the EU ever had to lose in the negotiation. And the only thing we probably had to give was a bet on fishing, but it was also the only thing we could offer to the other side to try and get concessions elsewhere. So they kind of got screwed as well. But on the smooth trading thing, you know, we're aligned anyway, and that would benefit both sides. On the question, do UK government recognise and understand what's going on? I agree with Liam, they do. Privately. Publicly, they won't say it because they're still wedded a bit to the sea of opportunity, whereas in fact, it's, for a lot of businesses, it's been a sea of, I was almost going to swear, I was going to say a bad word there, sea of something rubbish for a lot of businesses. So you won't get any public pronouncements. The other thing was, the UK government, I think, did quite a smart job. Success was defined as not having empty supermarket shelves and not having motorways in Kent and airports in Kent full of trucks. And we don't have the first thing because they've delayed checks anyway on imports coming in, they just waved through. And we don't have the second thing because half the trucks going are empty and a lot of trade isn't happening in the first place. So it's a kind of, didn't we do well? Look, you don't have all these visuals of things going wrong. Whereas actually the pain's being felt on empty shelves in Carrefour where Scottish seafood should be at the moment. So, but privately, they do recognise it's happening. And I think I sense more appetite now to engage with Europe in solutions than there has been before. But it's got to start now. We can't wait until April.
Okay. Very conscious of the time. So these are quick fire questions, and some for you, James, and some for you, Liam. So for you, James, you might want to write these down. Why would a sanitary certificate be needed for beer in Italy, but not in the rest of the EU? And secondly, do you have a view on whether belly hold export in aircraft is a more attractive export option just now than trucks, or are the problems the same however you are exporting? Liam, one of our questions is from a producer of fine art prints, and what they want to know whether the paper on which these prints are printed will be subject to a check for plant origin. And finally, between the two of you, whichever you prefer, Derek MacDonald makes the point that the ROO appears to classify fish caught in the UK EEZ by Norwegian vessels, but landed into northeast Scotland for onward export to the EU after processing as failing the test and being liable for a tariff. Is that true? And is that what we were expecting to get? So those are your 4 questions. James, you first.
Yeah, I didn't scribble down fast enough, Christine. Give me question 2 again. I've got beer in Italy. What was question 2?
Belly hold export.
Oh, yes. Yeah, okay.
Plane job and truck.
Okay. So sanitary certificate for beer in Italy, don't know. But we do have a staff member, Claudio, who is our specialist in Italy. So I will ask the question there, unless Liam knows the answer to that one. But I will look into that. I noticed that's come from someone who's a regular on all the webinars but I've been involved in, anonymous attendee. So if they could let themselves be known to the Brodies guys, we'll try and get an answer and feedback on that. Belly hold aircraft. So belly hold into the EU is between 10 and 15 times the price of truck. So broadly 15 to 20p a kilo to send by road, about £2.20 to send by belly hold. The challenge is you still got to check the paperwork, you've still got the import requirements. And actually, if you wanted to send seafood into Europe, at the moment it's going to Boulogne-sur-Mer, the nearest we could land it would be Ostend. You'd still need to then set up trucking routes to get from there to the main market. So belly hold is attractive the further you go, oddly. So it works in North America, works in Far East. It doesn't look like a solution for Europe because ultimately you still got to meet the core requirements. You just be doing it at a slightly different place. The only reason belly hold was ever really floated as a potential, even with the ridiculous cost of it, is if there was actual log jams, you know, those queues of lorries at Kent, and they don't exist for the reason that I've mentioned.
Paper, Liam.
Right, so I'm going to finish on belly hold. One thing to consider is the price of road transport and lack of groupage is inflating prices on road transport. So belly hold may actually look more attractive than it used to. On paper, depends on the nature of the paper, but you know, the wood pulp has been transformed into being paper. So the commodity code of the goods is paper. I wouldn't expect it to be subject to SPS checks unless it was very specialist and had not been fully treated in the paper processing. There are some very extraordinary fine art papers that still have plant material in them. So it depends is the answer. On the other question, which was on the fish, there are rules of origin are quite complex on fish. So typically it would be the flag of the vessel. In this case, it's a Norwegian vessel. So the goods are Norwegian in effect, even although they could be classed as Norwegian, although they're landed in the UK. And they've been landed at that point. So therefore, they are Norwegian goods going from the UK into the EU that would be subject to tariff. But actually, you know, I need to know a little bit more about that. And again, I'm happy to take that offline and to get a bit more detail on rules of origin. Certainly it seems at the moment that they are failing the test as UK product. If they were then landed and processed in some way and value added sufficiently into a finished, you know, ready meal or something, then that would be different. But I think as standard fish, I think they would be probably it's the flag of the vessel that's the issue here.
Thank you very much. As many on these seminars will know, my chief concern is to finish on time. I am keen to do that here, but not before I thank James and Liam for what I think was an absolutely excellent webinar. That you could answer the question about paper, Liam, and sound like it was true is pretty impressive. But no, we're incredibly grateful to you both for giving up your time for this session. I know from some of the feedback we've already seen on screen, it has been very well received. If people do have follow-up questions, please do fire them over to Charles and to me, and we will pass them on. But as ever, we're very, very grateful to you, our audience, for participating. Let us have your feedback, and we hope to see you again soon. But for now, goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.